When the Sega Dreamcast launched in the United States in September of 1999, a newfound excitement swirled around the brand. After years of poor sales, media ridicule, and being shunned by third parties, Sega appeared to finally be making all the right moves. The new Dreamcast was incredibly powerful, easy to develop for, and most importantly, priced at a level that made it quite competitive against its contemporaries. It launched to some pretty stellar reviews, and the platform seemed to be on pace to reclaim the popularity Sega had with its Genesis years earlier. Behind the scenes, things weren't looking quite so rosy, however. Lagging sales in Japan and the forthcoming PlayStation 2 had Sega's executives worried that the Dreamcast was a doomed endeavor. Most of us outside of the industry had no clue just how cash-strapped Sega had become. If the holiday sales of 2000 didn't turn it all around, Sega would need to face the music the following year. In this episode, we will take a look at the last days of Sega as a hardware maker from the viewpoint of a 25-year-old who was loving his Dreamcast. What was it like to get so many incredible games to only see Sega announce it was all over just a month later? I hope you guys enjoy Sega's Last Christmas. The year 2000 had been an epic time to be a Sega fan before the holiday season even got started. We got an exceptional home version of Crazy Taxi, the open-world delivery game that had a kick-ass soundtrack and some pretty amazing visuals. The extra modes that shipped with the home version were worth investigating whether you liked the arcade or not. Legacy of Kain: Soul Reaver was a port of the PlayStation original with improved visuals and the same great story and gameplay. It was my favorite version of that game. Tecmo's Dead or Alive 2 was a sequel to the original that first appeared on Sega's Model 2 arcade platform. The Dreamcast's powerful hardware was shown off here in fine form, easily making it one of the most sought-after fighters at the time. Resident Evil Code Veronica showed up in 2000 as well. This new entry into Capcom's survival horror universe finally gave us a look at the series with a completely 3D engine. It followed the adventures of Claire and Chris Redfield and introduced some truly insane rivals for them to battle against. Capcom also showed up with multiple fighting games to keep ravenous fans satiated. The criminally underrated Plasma Sword was the sequel to Star Gladiators we didn't know we needed. It's not a graphical showpiece, but it sure was fun. Capcom also had the truly unique Tech Romancer, a mech-based fighting game with snappy visuals and gameplay that was quite different from your normal 6-button fighter. Street Fighter Alpha 3 landed that year too, an excellent port of the final game in that series. It didn't matter that you could get it anywhere else because the Dreamcast version was sharper, loaded faster, and had most of the arcade's animation. Both Street Fighter 3 Double Impact and Third Strike hit within months of one another, giving happy Dreamcast owners access to all three versions of that game. Whichever one you preferred, you were covered. Capcom even blessed the world with the first home version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 that year, and you could only get it on Sega's platform. Originally released in the arcades for the Naomi platform, it gave you so many fighters to choose, it seemed like you could never get tired of it. Power Stone 2 showed up, and as good as the first had been, it upped the ante in every single category. Better graphics, more moves, bigger stages, it was the ultimate sequel of 3D arena-based fighting goodness. Of course, Sega Sports were back on point and they loaded the Dreamcast up that year. NHL 2K hit early and strong, kicking off the franchise with a solid entry. Virtua Striker 2, one of the most accessible and playable football games I've ever had the pleasure of owning, showed up, and it looked absolutely fantastic. American football wasn't left out either, and the absolutely breathtaking NFL 2K1 improved upon the first in every single way. I had been a fan of Madden for years since the Genesis, but this one showed me there could be more than one excellent NFL title. There was a whole host of other genres that got excellent representation as well. Carrier was a great addition to the survival horror category, and Sega's own Virtual On Oratorio Tangram made a hell of a splash for arena-based fighting games. Gigawing represented shoot-em-ups like a champ, and I really enjoyed a number of racing games like V-Rally and Sega GT. The point is that there were so many great Dreamcast games released in 2000 that I'd be here for hours trying to give them all their due time, but I think you get the point. Leading up to the holidays, there had rarely been a finer time to be a Sega fan. From the perspective of a customer, they were hitting home runs almost consistently, and the Dreamcast was well on its way to a long and fruitful life. I'm classifying the holiday season as November and December since that's when the shopping frenzy seems to be heaviest. As strong as the Dreamcast lineup had been that year, the last 2 months of 2000 produced some real classics. It started off with the excellent NBA 2K1. Like their NFL series, Sega really did an excellent job here. They had only rebooted the entire line the year before, so to get a game this good looking and playing was a real treat. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was released as well. While it was released after the PlayStation version, man did it look so much better. For many it was one of the best games of the year, and you could play the best console version of it right there on the old Dreamcast. Shenmue also finally saw the light of day at the end of 2000. What had started out as a troubled Sega Saturn project ended up being a sprawling masterpiece on the Dreamcast. While it did have some rough edges, I had never played anything like it before. It opened up the world of video games to being life simulators, mixed with adventure elements, mixed with fighting games, mixed with an RPG, hell, pretty much mixed with everything. Yu Suzuki really tried to give us something different and unique, and I think they succeeded and then some. The crossover Capcom vs SNK burst onto the scene at the end of 2000 as well. In what many gamers had been wanting for years, you could finally take many of your favorite Capcom and SNK fighters and pit them against one another in combat. This is one of the best fighters on the platform and did both companies proud. Skies of Arcadia, Sega's entry into the still crazy popular RPG category, also made its way out. An unforgettable cast of heroes and villains were just a small part of this game's beautiful and exotic world. The battle system was cool as well, featuring your typical hand-to-hand and magical combat, as well as ship battles that really changed the feel of things. It's one of my favorite RPGs of all time. The gorgeous Test Drive Le Mans was here, a great looking game in its own right. I adored the replay system in this game and could loop them for hours. Capcom's weird and wonderful Cannon Spike wowed us as well. The 3D arena-style shooter featured a bunch of Capcom's famous characters from some of their other franchises. Mega Man, Street Fighter, Ghosts and Goblins, and more saw representation. Capcom just kept the gold coming too. We got both Resident Evil 2 and 3 during that stretch, high-res versions of the original PlayStation games. They even gave us Dino Crisis, making the Dreamcast one of the best places for horror games almost overnight. Finally, we got Grandia 2 on the Dreamcast, a sequel to the Saturn original that never made its way west for a Sega platform. This was another one I absolutely loved. The story, the characters, the gameplay, it all meshed so well into one epic adventure. It was years late, but it was so exciting to finally have Grandia in the States on Sega's hardware. It was 20 years ago that it all happened, one of the single greatest years I've ever seen in gaming. Just release after release of top-end software. It was non-stop, man. You couldn't keep up with everything you wanted to play. You would start something and bam, something else would be out you wanted to go pick up at the game store. These rapid-fire, high-quality releases came to define my memories of Sega's last platform. Not the BS you hear today about how it all fell apart and how the Dreamcast was doomed from the beginning. Even I'm guilty of the retrospective of making the Dreamcast seem like a dead system walking its entire life. But back then in 2000, with so many games hitting and so many unforgettable moments, all you felt and thought about at the time was how incredible that platform was turning out and how much fun you were having with it. This becomes a recurring problem with looking back at games and systems after the fact. We often lump the history together like it all occurred at the same time, instead of the reality that these times and events were experienced over the course of weeks, months, and years. Back then, most of us knew that Sega had a hard time with Saturn, but things were looking so bright for the Dreamcast after it launched in North America, we really did feel Sega had righted the ship and things were well on the way to recovery. But 2001 would change everything. Of course, we later learned that Sega had been in bad shape for years. They were struggling just to get the Dreamcast hardware launched in every region, and were pretty much broken, millions in debt, while we were playing all these great games I listed. In fact, Sega had been internally prepared for the demise of the Dreamcast for months. Rumors began to pop up towards the end of 2000 about ports of Sega games to other platforms, and though Sega denied them, you knew something was up. But nothing could stop the shock of January 30th, 2001, when Sega announced both the death of the Dreamcast and its home hardware business completely. I had expected Sega to maybe license out some of its popular games to make some money. In fact, it wouldn't have been the first time they had done such a thing. Sega games appeared on rival consoles before, after all. But to hear that the Sega that I had known it for nearly 20 years was coming to an end was a blow that I just couldn't believe. The Master System, the Genesis, the Game Gear, the Saturn, the Dreamcast, it was all over. Games continued to flow well into 2001 and beyond for the Dreamcast, but it was bittersweet considering the circumstances. Looking back on that final year and Christmas that the Dreamcast had as a viable and growing platform, I really did have a great time. I had supported it with dozens upon dozens of purchases, and there wasn't a single day where I was left wanting something to play. Every genre got incredible representation, and 2000 went out with a bang with the likes of Shenmue, Skies of Arcadia, and Grandia 2. I don't think there has ever been a console that amassed so many games so quickly and to such an extent. The Dreamcast was only on the North American market for a year and a half before Sega pulled the plug. Whether it was due to Sega's design or the eagerness of third parties to support the business model, something lit a fire under developers that really flooded that thing with tons of games really fast. I did end up missing the games of Electronic Arts, particularly the prospect of a Dreamcast version of Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit or Road Rash 3D, but the platform still had plenty of racing goodness to substitute for them. 20 years ago, it was Sega's last Christmas as a maker of consoles, and I'll never ever forget their run. It was indeed at times marked by the drama of failed add-ons and corporate drama, but that last year was one of the best times I had as a fan of the company and its many products. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.